A well in Egypt turns out to be a long-forgotten tomb, medieval treasure hidden in the Second World War was just discovered, and an entire ancient Roman town was just unearthed in Italy. These are some of the most amazing discoveries made in 2025 so far. While exploring the Saqqara archaeological site in Egypt this year, a team of Egyptian and Japanese archaeologists made an unexpected find. They were digging in an area they'd previously discovered ancient graves at, but this time they came across a well. What they thought was a well, anyway. Turns out it was the entrance to a forgotten tomb. The well was actually a vertical shaft leading down to a burial chamber, and as they kept digging, they uncovered 4 tombs, some made of mud bricks, others carved right into the rock. The tombs date back more than 4,600 years to ancient Egypt. The team also found 10 more burials from 3,200 years ago, showing that Saqqara was used as a cemetery for well over 1,000 years. They also worked on cleaning a Greco-Roman catacomb, where they found mummified remains, ancient artifacts like ceramics, bird cages, and drinking glasses. The team is planning to return for more digs to see what else might be hidden beneath the sands of Saqqara, but if you're a superstitious type, you might find this one kind of eerie because, you know what happens when ancient Egyptian tombs are unearthed, you know? Just last month, news came out about a group of church officials and museum staff in Lithuania who discovered royal treasures that had been hidden for over 85 years. The story actually starts way back in World War II, when caretakers of Vilnius Cathedral decided to hide the cathedral's priceless treasures for safekeeping. Their hiding spot clearly worked, maybe a little too well, because the treasure sat hidden decades after the war. Well, last fall, a team decided to give it another shot. They'd tried everything before: metal detecting, radar, thermal imaging, but they were never able to find anything. This time though, they used a tiny camera on a thin wire and poked it into cracks in the basement of the cathedral. At first, nothing showed up. Then suddenly, something caught their eye on the screen. They carefully opened the cavity, and there it was, the long-lost treasure. All they needed to do is stick a camera on a little wire. All that other stuff was so high-tech. Then this worked. I love that. Among the finds were royal burial items, some more than 450 years old. The treasure included 3 crowns, a scepter, an orb, jewelry, silver plaques, and a medallion. One of the crowns belonged to Alexander Jagiellon, the Grand Duke of Lithuania and King of Poland, who died in 1506, and 2 others belonged to the wives of King Sigismund II Augustus, who passed away in 1572. News of this story has been making the rounds recently. Archaeologists working in Italy discovered this long-lost Roman town hidden beneath farmland. Incredible. The site in the Lazio region dates back to around the 1st century BCE, and it's pretty well preserved. Researchers found entire buildings, including homes and workshops, with walls still standing and even some floor mosaics intact. And then there were the artifacts. You got pottery, coins, and tools. The town was a busy spot for trade. It was probably connected to a bunch of other Roman towns, all working together to supply bigger cities like Rome with what they needed. The find could help scholars understand how smaller towns in the Roman Empire functioned and interacted with one another. We've uncovered a lot about more famous cities like Rome and Pompeii, so discovering more about a smaller, lesser-known town like this is pretty cool. Researchers have recently deciphered these ancient Babylonian tablets, more than 2,500 years old, that mention lunar eclipses as omens. To these ancient people, an eclipse was seen as an ominous sign, often bad news for the kingdom. One tablet specifically mentions a lunar eclipse as a warning that the king could be in danger, or that disaster might befall the kingdom. They believed the moon had an influence on world events, from the fate of kings to outcomes of wars, which isn't all that surprising. I mean, imagine looking up at the sky 2,500 years ago and seeing a big shadow swallow the moon. I mean, what are you supposed to think? That good things are about to happen? The tablets were written in cuneiform script, the oldest known form of writing, and not easy to decipher. But it's clear that the Babylonians knew a lot about astronomy, even though their interpretation of it was a bit off. In 2020, researchers found a strange greenish meteorite out in the Algerian Sahara. It looked like a regular chunk of space rock, but once they analyzed it, it turned out to be something way bigger. This thing, now called Erg-Chek O2, is volcanic, meaning it came from the crust of an ancient proto-planet. and it's old, like older than Earth, over 4 billion years. It came from the outer layer of a planet that formed, had lava, cooled down, and then got smashed apart. This is one of the only times we've found a rock that lets us study early planet crust. What you're looking at here is a piece of dead planet that flew through space before being buried in the desert for billions of years. Imagine getting to hold the surface of a lost planet in your hand. Amazing. The Hapatia stone was found in Egypt in 1996. At first, scientists thought it might be a meteorite. Some said it might have been part of a comet, but none of the usual classifications fit. Inside, it had tiny diamonds and all kinds of bizarre chemical traces. The ratios of elements were totally off, nothing like what you'd find on Earth, Mars, or even in known meteorites. Some of the compounds in it don't exist anywhere else. A couple of researchers even suggested it might be a leftover from a supernova explosion. Not a regular rock, more like cosmic debris from before the solar system even formed. If it really is what some scientists claim, this could be the oldest solid thing we've ever touched, older than the solar system itself. In 2005, archaeologists working in Egypt's Valley of the Kings made a strange discovery. Just 15 feet away from King Tut's tomb was another sealed chamber made entirely from limestone. Inside were 28 large clay jars and 7 painted wooden coffins. Everything looked like your typical burial setup, until they opened the sarcophagi. There were no bodies, not even any inscriptions, no signs of who this was meant for. Instead, each coffin was just filled with dirt, bits of clay, scraps of wood, pieces of fabric, and chunks of natron, the same substance Egyptians used to dry out mummies. In India's Thar Desert near a village called Boa, researchers recently found a bunch of enormous geometric patterns carved into the desert sand. They weren't spotted from the ground. These lines only came to light in 2021 thanks to satellite images. What they found was massive spirals, loops, and long parallel lines stretching over 48 kilometers, or about 30 miles. One spiral alone measures over 7 kilometers. The patterns are shallow, only about 10 centimeters deep and up to a half-meter wide, but they're incredibly precise, and they're bigger than the famous Nazca lines in Peru. They're thought to be around 150 years old, possibly created in the late 1800s. But back then, there was no way anyone could view them from above. The geoglyphs are laid out around some old stone memorials known as chatris, which honor the dead, and that's led some to think they probably have some spiritual purpose. Still, no one really knows who made them. There are no local legends about them. No tools or construction clues have turned up either. Out in the Sahara, there's a place called Nabta Playa. It's basically like an ancient version of Stonehenge, only older, way older. We're talking over 6,000 years ago, at least 1,000 years before Stonehenge was even a thing. The site has huge standing stones, some over 2.5 meters tall, arranged in a circle with several rows of flat slabs nearby. Some of the stones line up with the summer solstice, and others may have marked the rainy season, which makes sense since the place used to sit right on the edge of a seasonal lake. No one really knows who built it. Whoever they were, they lived during the Stone Age and clearly knew what they were doing. Archaeologists found cattle bones and some everyday tools at the site, which might mean the place was used for rituals, but they've never found any human remains here. It looks like this was more for astronomy, tracking the sun, maybe even the stars. Professor J. McKim Malville, who studies ancient astronomy, said it's one of the first clear signs of humans trying to understand the sky. And this all happened long before the rise of ancient Egypt. Deep in western Sahara's deserts are hundreds of mysterious stone formations, and no one's quite sure what they're for or when they were built. Archaeologists using field surveys and satellite images between 2002 and 2009 documented these shapes, but detailed digs haven't really happened much. A few burial mounds have been dated to around 1,500 years ago, and rock art nearby shows cattle, giraffes, oryx. Much of the site hasn't been explored though. Ongoing conflict and security threats have made fieldwork extremely risky. These stone formations are pretty intricate though. One of them stretches over 600 meters or nearly 2,000 feet with circles, lines, rock piles all laid out together. A lot of people think they might be graves, but without any artifacts to actually date them, It's mostly just speculation at this point. Unfortunately, people go missing all the time. Some in remote places, others seemingly vanish out of thin air right in broad daylight. These are the most mysterious disappearances of 2025. This year, something really disturbing has been happening in India. Young men in the Gujar community, who are traditionally nomadic folk in the rural mountains of Kashmir, have been going missing. Multiple bodies have been pulled from rivers and canals, mostly in South Kashmir. At first, police were attributing the deaths to accidental drowning. Some of them also thought these men may have been taking their own lives, but the Gujar were desperate for help, saying there was foul play going on here that was being ignored. One case involved a 20-year-old whose body was found miles from where he vanished. Another teen was discovered with injuries the family says don't really match drowning. Locals have been accusing authorities of brushing over signs that are clearly pointing to targeted attacks. These men are being kidnapped and killed. There have been protests and calls for independent investigations. The number of missing persons reports has been increasing steadily as the community's trust in police just continues to dwindle. And unfortunately, at the time of this recording, there hasn't been much progress. This is very recent. So just on May 13th, 17-year-old Skye Conway was seen on CCTV pushing her 4-month-old infant in a pram through Strood Town Centre in Kent, England. That footage is the last confirmed sighting of either of them. According to police, Skye had left her home in Rochester area earlier that day and was possibly heading toward the train station. She didn't have a phone, and attempts to trace her through friends or social media led nowhere. Her family is saying this was completely out of character and have pleaded for her safe return. Investigators followed up on possible sightings, including one in a town nearby, but none have been confirmed. The police made a direct public appeal on social media, releasing images of Skye. So far, though, they don't have any solid leads as to where she went or why. On March 3rd, 2025, 20-year-old college student Sadishka Kananki traveled to Punta Cana for spring break with a couple friends, staying at the Rio Republica Hotel. On the morning of March 6th, she was seen drinking at the hotel bar with 5 women and 2 men. Surveillance footage shows the group heading to the beach around 4:15 a.m., with Kananki walking arm in arm with 22-year-old Iowa student Joshua Stephen Ribe. The others eventually left, but she stayed on the beach with Ribe. He later claimed a wave pulled them into the ocean and that while he tried to save her, he lost sight of her. He told investigators he last saw her walking in shallow water, and after vomiting seawater and falling asleep on a beach chair, he assumed that she had left. There's surveillance footage showing him leaving the beach at 8:55 a.m. Kananki hasn't been seen since, though. Her family actually requested that she be declared legally dead, but Dominican law requires a 4-year wait. Ribe was detained and questioned several times before being released on March 18th. He was granted an emergency passport and left the island the next day. No charges have been filed, and Kananki is still missing. Ashley Elkins, a 30-year-old mom of 2 from Warren, Michigan, went missing on January 2nd. She told her family she was running errands that day, but after sending a few strange texts, including one that mentioned a dream her mom had about her taking a truck, her phone was shut off and no one heard from her again. Her car was found 5 days later near her ex-boyfriend DeAndre Booker's apartment in Roseville. Police searched his place and they found a large amount of BLOOD in the bathroom. DNA tests confirmed it was Ashley's. Booker was arrested on January 8th for lying to police. He was formally charged with first-degree tampering with evidence, mutilation of a body, and hiding a death. Police and volunteers spent over a week searching a landfill for her remains. So far, her body still hasn't been found. This is a very strange case. So police in East London are trying to identify the parents of 3 children who were abandoned over an 8-year period. Each child, one in 2017, another in 2019, and the latest in 2024, was left in a different location. One at a hospital, one at a church, and one in a park. At first, no one made the connection, but after new DNA testing in early 2025, investigators realized that all 3 are siblings. But even with a full DNA profile of the mother, authorities still don't know who she is. There's no birth records, no known relatives, no matches in any national database. Police now believe the parents may have gone to great lengths to stay hidden, possibly living off the grid or using fake names. So they've been going door to door asking for voluntary DNA swabs. They're also worried there might be a fourth sibling out there, or more. There's no clear motive yet, and the police haven't ruled out the possibility of trafficking, but for now they're asking the public for any tips that might help identify the parents or explain why this keeps happening. Archaeologists in South Africa discovered a lost city using laser technology. The Kweneng ruins are the remains of a pre-colonial Swana capital in South Africa, just south of modern-day Johannesburg. This site was occupied from the 14th to 19th century, starting around the 1300s and reaching its peak in the 14th century. It was one of the largest settlements of the Swana people who spoke a Bantu language before the Europeans arrived. The Swana people created large and well-organized settlements that really impressed early European visitors, who described them as cities and metropolises. The site began as scattered homesteads in the 15th century, growing into a city by the 18th century. But it was probably abandoned sometime in the 1820s as colonial expansion was happening. Because of how thick the vegetation is in the area, the Kweneng ruins were hard to spot from the air until researchers started using advanced techniques like LiDAR, which uses lasers to map out the land. And this technology revealed the layout of the ruins, including hundreds of households and a marketplace. What you're looking at here is what's called a Klerksdorp sphere. The strange spheres were first discovered in Ottosdal, South Africa. Scientists date these spheres to around 3 billion years ago, claiming they are natural formations known as carbonate concretions. They range in size from half a centimeter to 10 centimeters or so, and a lot of them have these even grooves around them that make them look almost too perfect to be natural. So how did they form? Well, according to scientists, minerals developed in the gaps between sediments, similar to how crystals can sometimes take on very precise shapes, and over time, weathering wore down the surrounding rock, leaving these smooth, rounded balls behind. But there are some who believe that there could be more to the story. Since their discovery in South African mines, there have been all sorts of theories, like they could be evidence of ancient aliens. One story goes that a man took one of these spheres to NASA, where it was tested, and allegedly NASA concluded that the sphere could only have been created in zero gravity because of its perfect balance. Now, despite the lack of scientific evidence, some theorists have speculated that these spheres were created by intelligent beings 3 billion years ago. Others think that they might have been an ancient form of information technology used by some advanced civilizations long before humans existed. But again, the scientific community mostly agrees that the spheres are just natural formations, but what do you think? A story just came out this year about a really fascinating cave painting in South Africa. The Horned Serpent panel is this piece of rock art created by the San people of South Africa between 1821 and 1835. This panel features various animals, but one of them really stands out, a long-bodied creature with downward turned tusks that doesn't match any known modern species in the area. Researcher Julien Benoit stated, as the San people are known to have included various aspects of their surroundings into art, including fossils, the tusked creature might have been inspired by an extinct species. In the Karoo Basin, where the rock art is located, there are tons of well-preserved fossils, including those of tusked animals called dicynodonts. These creatures lived a long time before humans appeared in Africa and were already extinct by the time the San created their artwork. But there are San myths about large animals that once roamed the region. Benoit points out a couple key factors that make him think the rock art is a depiction of a dicynodont. One, the tusks face downward, which matches dicynodonts and not any modern African animal, and the area is full of their fossils, so seems pretty clear-cut. Kamapa is a mythical creature from the Basotho people of southern Africa, described as this shapeless, gluttonous monster. It has an insatiable appetite, swallowing everything in its path, both people and animals. As it devours more and more, it grows larger and larger. It's also said to have multiple sharp tongues, which it uses as deadly weapons. According to the story, Kamapa rampaged through towns and villages, consuming all living beings. Only one woman managed to survive by hiding in the ashes of her home. After the monster had swallowed nearly everyone, it became so bloated that it got stuck in a mountain pass. As the last human, the woman prayed to God, begging for a way to continue humanity. In response to her prayers, she became pregnant and eventually gave birth to a son named Ditolan. To her shock, Ditolan grew into a fully grown man almost instantly. His mother explained the terrible fate that had befallen their people at the hands of Kamapa. Ignoring her warnings, Ditolan decided to confront the beast himself. Armed with a blade, he bravely confronted the beast, which swallowed him whole. But he survived inside its belly, using his blade to tear through its insides. With a final roar, Kamapa fell dead, and Ditolan emerged, freeing thousands of people who had been trapped inside the monster. The Grootslang is a creature, again, from South African folklore. Much like the Inkinyamba I talked about earlier, this one is also a giant serpent with the head of another animal, this time an elephant. It's said to live in a cave known as the Wonder Hole or the Bottomless Pit, found in the Richardsveld region. This cave is said to connect to the ocean about 40 miles away, and some legends claim that it's filled with diamonds. Local stories say that the cave goes down about 60 feet before branching off into steep passages, and somewhere lurking down there is the ancient, powerful serpent known as the Grootslang, which hoards and guards precious gems and gold. There are plenty of legends of men descending into the cave in search of treasures never to be seen again. In 1917, an English businessman named Peter Grayson vanished while searching for treasure in the Richtertsveld, leading to stories that the Grootslang had something to do with his disappearance. Microplastics are showing up in human brains. In Argentina, construction workers uncovered a super weird alien-like skull, and in Utah, a guy fishing found a human skull half buried in the mud with more bones scattered nearby, and no one knows who they belong to. These are disturbing discoveries in 2025. When scientists at the University of New Mexico started digging into human brain tissue samples, they found something no one really wanted to find: microplastics in the brain, and in higher amounts than in organs like the liver or kidney. The team, led by toxicologist Matthew Kempen, reported that these fragments, some as tiny as 200 nanometers, have steadily climbed, with concentrations up to about 50% in the past 8 years. Kempen said this really changes the landscape, makes it so much more personal. He also pointed out that some brains from people with dementia carried up to 10 times as much plastic than in other brains. But does that mean microplastics are causing dementia? Well, it's not definitive proof. Maybe damaged brains just accumulate more of the plastic, not the other way around. But as for how the plastic gets in, it might come from food or water, say livestock eating plastic-contaminated crops, or fields irrigated with water that has traces of plastic in it. Construction workers in San Fernando, Argentina were digging for a new water system when they hit a burial urn. Inside was a human skull, but not one that looked normal. As you can see, this thing is pretty oddly shaped, almost alien-like. Even experts admitted the thing looked unsettling. The skull was taken to the provincial anthropology department to be studied. Scientists confirmed the skull is real, but no one agrees yet on how it ended up that way. One strong theory ties it to an ancient practice called artificial cranial deformation, where a baby's head was deliberately shaped using wooden boards or tight bandages while the skull bones were still soft. It sounds brutal, but thousands of years ago it was common in South America. Cultures who lived in the region between the 3rd and 12th centuries viewed it as a way to show their family's status in society, or to give the child a special spiritual or cultural identity. Back in March, a man named Philip Morfin was out fishing in West Valley City, Utah, when something strange caught his eye near the edge of the water. At first he thought it was an animal skull half buried in the mud, poked it with his fishing rod to flip it over, and that's when he realized what he was actually looking at. 2 eye sockets in the teeth. I saw a human skull. It was pretty disturbing, he told reporters. The spot where he was fishing sits next to a business park, not exactly where you'd expect to find human remains. Police showed up just after 7 p.m., confirmed that the bones looked human. Roxanne Vancoup from the West Valley City Police said the medical examiner was called in to come and collect the remains. She also mentioned that other bones were found nearby, some of them partially underwater. Right now, no one knows who the remains belong to. Investigators are going through old missing persons reports, but Banku said there aren't any unsolved homicides in the area. We're waiting for the medical examiner's office to conduct tests to try and identify the remains, she said. In August, an anonymous source was driving through the desert outside Searchlight, Nevada, when they came across dozens of small ash piles scattered across the sand. When they got closer, they realized they were looking at cremated human remains. About 70 piles of burnt bone and ash were found near a dirt road just outside the town. The person sent a photo to the news, who then contacted the police. The Nevada Bureau of Land Management confirmed the ashes were human. They're still trying to figure out where they came from or who put them there. It's not illegal for someone to scatter cremated remains in the desert, but the agency made it clear that, quote, individual, non-commercial scattering is the only kind allowed. Dumping large amounts like this could break several laws, especially if it's a business behind it. Just weeks before this too, a Las Vegas funeral home was shut down after inspectors found decomposing bodies that have been sitting around for months. One was actually there for nearly a year. Searchlight is only about an hour south of Vegas, so Around that same time though, a funeral home in Colorado was caught hiding 20 rotting corpses behind a secret door and giving families fake ashes. Why the hell? Why? That is so creepy. Anyway, is it possible someone drove from Colorado to Nevada to burn the remains? Maybe, but at this point the mystery has not been solved. So in Gdansk, Poland, construction workers were tearing up the ground under this old ice cream shop, and instead of just finding pipes and junk, they hit something else. A medieval knight's tomb. This was just back in July, but the shop had been there for decades and nobody had a clue there was an entire burial ground under it. Archaeologists were called in and they found the knight buried with pieces of his chainmail armor still intact. His tombstone had a carving of a knight holding a shield, though the coat of arms was too worn out to make out. And that means no one knows yet who this guy was. They've already found more than 200 other graves in the same area, along with the remains of an old wooden church that used to stand there though. But now everything is being taken to the Gdansk Archaeological Museum so they can figure out who this armored mystery man actually was. In April of 2025, construction crews at Temple University ended up digging up human remains and old caskets. The site sits on the Old Monument Cemetery, which opened in 1837 and once held about 28,000 bodies. When the university expanded in the 50s, most of those graves were disturbed. Headstones were dumped along the Delaware River and only a few families were contacted. Now, decades later, Temple ran into the leftovers. Work stopped right away, and archaeologists, police, and the coroner were called in. Temple said they followed all the experts' guidance to handle everything respectfully. Historians say this isn't exactly a surprise though. Seth Brugman, a history professor at Temple, explained that the cemetery had been a green space for the city, but the university claimed it was neglected so they could expand parking and take over the main entrance. Back in October, researchers using satellites and drones discovered a bunch of ancient cities in the mountains of Uzbekistan. The most impressive one is called the Gunbulak, a massive medieval city that pretty much dropped off the map. It sits above the old Silk Road, which was a network of ancient trade routes that connected Eurasia, active from the 2nd century BCE until the mid-15th century. From what they've found so far, the Gunbulak was no small village. It had city walls, there were residential areas, buildings, possibly workshops for metalworking. They think it was active from around the 6th to 11th century. So for centuries, this place was pretty busy with trade and culture. Weird thing is, it's never really shown up in historical records, like nobody really wrote about it. The place was completely lost and forgotten until now. They're still surveying the area, but it looks like Gunbulak might just be the tip of the iceberg. There could be even more lost cities buried in the hills. Just recently, researchers working in Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula found the layout of a previously unknown Maya city now being called Valeriana. Using LiDAR, they mapped out a full city hidden in the jungle. There were plazas and temples, homes, a ball game court, and a dammed up reservoir. This was not a tiny village. It looks like Valeriana was a major political capital back in its day. The amount of planning that would have gone into this place is impressive. That reservoir means they had a handle on managing water, which was a big deal in that environment. One of the archaeologists said Valeriana's design is just as complex as some of the more famous Maya sites, which is wild considering nobody even knew it was here until recently. What's really interesting too is how well preserved the place is. It's overgrown, but the buildings and layout are still visible. The fact that something this big was only recently discovered though, it just goes to show how much may still be waiting to be found. Back in April, a group of researchers introduced a new way to peek underground using what's called cosmic ray muons. And they put it to the test at one of the most archaeologically packed places on Earth, ancient Jerusalem. Specifically, they focused on the City of David site, which has layers of ruins going back thousands of years. The team used a special type of muon detector that can spot hidden voids and anomalies underground, basically giving them a kind of 3D X-ray vision without digging. Now, just what in the hell are cosmic ray muons though? Well, they're subatomic particles created when cosmic rays from space hit Earth's atmosphere. They constantly rain down and can pass through rock, buildings, underground chambers. Muon imaging works by detecting the paths of these particles. When they hit dense material, they slow down, or they just get absorbed. But when they pass through open spaces like tunnels or rooms, they just keep going. So by measuring where muons get through, researchers can spot what might be hiding underground. Early scans from the project showed areas that don't match up with anything they'd previously found, including one large void that might be part of an ancient passage or room. It's still too soon to say exactly what they've found, but this is a very cool new method that could completely change how archaeologists study sites where digging might be restricted. More scanning is planned over the coming months. Deep in the Yucatan jungle, archaeologists came across the ruins of a massive Maya city called Akamtun. It had been hidden for centuries, buried in the dense jungle. The discovery was led by Mexico's National Institute of Anthropology and History, and the site covers over 120 acres. We're talking about temple pyramids, stone plazas, ball courts, and stairways leading to raised platforms, all signs that Akamtun was a pretty important place at one time. The team believes it was at its peak between 600 and 800 CE, during the Maya civilization's late Classic period. What makes this find even more interesting is that the city isn't mentioned in any surviving Maya texts or their oral traditions. It was completely off the radar until now. That is rare for a place this big. One of the archaeologists called it a, quote, monumental civic ceremonial center, which basically means it was an important place for public gatherings, rituals, and politics. They also found cylindrical stone columns that aren't super common at other Maya sites, which might mean Akamtun had its own unique style of architecture. The Arctic Circle is harsh, vast, and conceals a lot of disturbing things under its layers and layers of permafrost. Today, I'm going to be talking about some of the creepiest stuff scientists have come across in this part of the world. We're starting things off with the case of the ping. So reports of strange sounds, often described as whistles, hums, or pings, have been documented in the Arctic. And one of the most famous cases involving a strange sound is the Arctic ping. Back in the summer of 2016, in a small Inuit hamlet called Igloolik in Nunavut, hunters started getting concerned about a strange ping noise coming from the Fury and Hecla Strait, which is a channel of water about 75 miles northwest of Igloolik. Now, the hunters' primary concern wasn't just how bizarre the sound was and the fact that they couldn't identify it, but the fact that it seemed to be scaring away the sea mammals in the area that they depend on. The sound seemed to be coming from the sea floor, and this wasn't just a few residents reporting the sound either. This was a big enough deal that the military was actually sent in to investigate, but they didn't find anything. One theory is that members of Greenpeace were somehow involved, creating the sound in order to scare off the animals from the hunters, but there's never been any definitive proof of that hypothesis. Next up, we have the Arctic UAPs. So just like with any remote area, the Arctic has its fair share of reported UFO sightings, and now some of these can be attributed to military activity or just misidentification of natural things, but some are still very much unexplained, and one of the biggest stories to come out recently is back in February of 2023 when all those UAPs were shot down over a bunch of different airspaces, mostly in Canada and the United States. News Nation just recently followed up on this story, saying that there were various sources claiming that there was a previously undisclosed encounter, 8 or 9 other UAPs, and this was right over the Arctic Circle. This was on February 1st, just a few days before the main objects had been shot down. Fighter jets were sent up from NORAD to engage with the objects, but the UAPs flew off at high speed, and no, they still aren't sure what these things were, unless they're just hiding that info from the public. Either way, it's pretty eerie stuff. Next up on the list, we have a very alarming discovery of viruses. Scientists have come across viruses like the Mola virus, for example, in the permafrost of the Arctic Circle. Permafrost is permanently frozen soil, and as it thaws, it exposes ancient layers, some of which contain ancient viruses. Mola virus is a type of giant virus, and the fact that viruses can linger deep within the ice, lying dormant for thousands of years and then unleash themselves on the world when they're thawed out, is a pretty freaky idea. Luckily, there haven't been any discovered so far that pose a serious threat to humans, but that doesn't mean that more potentially deadly ancient viruses won't rear their ugly head and become active as more permafrost starts to thaw. Who knows what could be locked away under there. If you are enjoying our channel so far, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button and leave your thoughts and comments down in the comments below. So speaking of these dormant viruses breaking free from melting Arctic ice, we have the very creepy case of the Siberian anthrax outbreak in 2016. And so unlike the dormant ancient viruses that I talked about before, this actually did affect human beings. Apparently this was caused by a heat wave thawed a 75-year-old reindeer carcass that had been infected with anthrax. The thawing process released dormant spores of the bacteria responsible for anthrax into the surrounding environment. The spores contaminated the soil and water sources nearby, and then local reindeer that were grazing on the contaminated land, of course, came into contact with these anthrax spores. Over 2,300 reindeer were infected. This then led to humans getting infected when they consumed the contaminated reindeer meat. About 100 people were hospitalized with anthrax exposure. One person even lost their life. So yeah, this was pretty freaky. Could have been much worse, but freaky nonetheless. Anthrax really is no joke. Just goes to show like how insidious dormant bacteria really is. In 2025, archaeologists in Peru discovered this hidden network of ancient Inca tunnels beneath the ground. These tunnels were used for water management and transportation, and they'd been surprisingly well preserved over the centuries. What's so important about this find is that it shows just how skilled the Inca were at engineering in a tough environment. Without modern tools, they dug these tunnels to direct water through the mountains, helping to irrigate crops during dry seasons. Some of the tunnels also worked as roads, allowing people and goods to move across the rough terrain. The Inca are already famous for their impressive structures like Machu Picchu. These tunnels are revealing another side to them. They were able to manage water and create infrastructure that kept their empire running smoothly, even in some of the most difficult conditions. In Germany, archaeologists digging in the Steinacker region discovered way more than they were expecting. Originally, they'd been setting out to find a rumored Roman estate, but instead they discovered ruins of a Roman highway stretching over 1/4 of a mile and a village with several buildings and artifacts. The road likely connected to 2 Roman forts about 6 miles apart. In terms of artifacts, they found fragments of wall paintings, found coins, a stone statue. The statue, identified as Mercury, the god of traders and merchants. Archaeologists believe the statue came from a temple dedicated to Mercury, showing just how important he was to the Romans, especially those involved in trade, of course. The village would have been a rest stop, a craft center, a small trading post that probably popped up around 100 CE and was abandoned by 300 CE. The Nazca lines have been talked about to death, but today we have an update for you. Recently, hundreds of new geoglyphs in the desert of southern Peru have been found with the help of artificial intelligence. There you go, it is good for some things. Researchers using AI to analyze satellite images discovered 303 additional geoglyphs in just 6 months. These include detailed depictions of animals like llamas and orcas holding weapons, more on that later, along with more human-like figures. Some of these things are over 2,000 years old, created by the Nazca people, who lived between 200 BCE and 600 CE. They're famous for their massive drawings etched into the desert floor, which could only have been fully appreciated from the air, which makes them very mysterious. So the AI model was key in this discovery. As lead author Masato Sakai explained, the quote, traditional method of study was slow and carried the risk of overlooking some of them. The AI, on the other hand, found faint lines 20 times faster than humans could. Now they were able to map out the distribution of the geoglyphs a lot more efficiently, to say the least. Some of these new figures are smaller, but even older than the previously known ones. The images include orcas holding blades, a symbol linked to human sacrifice. As Sakai pointed out, on some pottery from the Nazca period, there are scenes depicting orcas with blades cutting off human heads. Now, we're still not sure what the purpose of the Nazca lines was, but it seems like they would have held some spiritual significance. This year, archaeologists working in Pompeii discovered something pretty cool, a private spa complex, no longer operational of course, but it is helping to show us how the city's wealthy lived before Mount Vesuvius erupted and buried everyone in mounds of boiling hot lava. How's that for a hot tub? The spa complex was found during excavations of a home in what was once a wealthy district of Pompeii. This would have been a place for the elite to unwind and socialize. The spa had different rooms, including a hot bath, a cold bath, and a steam room, all beautifully detailed. Plus, the site shows how advanced Roman engineering with its plumbing and heating systems was. For years, scholars weren't sure what animal represented Seth, the Egyptian god of disorder, sexuality, and death. When we picture animals in ancient Egypt, cats come to mind a lot, crocodiles, of course, eagles, snakes, beetles. These animals were often used to represent various gods and goddesses, but Seth's unusual form in ancient art was a strange creature with this long snout and pointy ears and a tail. People have never really been sure what animal Seth was supposed to be. Some thought he may not have been based on an animal at all even, but recently archaeologist Pierre de Mare thinks he may have figured this out. After studying early depictions of Seth from between 4000 and 3000 BCE, he believes the animal was actually an aardvark. Not an animal we usually associate with ancient Egypt, but the aardvark's long ears, the snout and tail, they do match some of the earliest images of Seth. And de Mare also pointed out that people in sub-Saharan Africa have long associated aardvarks with themes like male virility and death, the same traits the god of Seth were associated with. Now, aardvarks don't live in the Nile Valley today, but animals like giraffes and elephants used to, so it is possible that aardvarks could have as well. Just recently, a team of researchers discovered prehistoric cave paintings in Indonesia that are among the oldest known to date. The paintings depict animals and human figures, important evidence of early human art in Southeast Asia. The cave paintings, which are estimated to be over 45,000 years old, give us a glimpse into the lives of our prehistoric ancestors. The artwork includes animals like pigs and buffalo, and human figures performing what look like rituals and hunting scenes. It's pretty amazing, because it shows that early humans in Southeast Asia were creating sophisticated art long before the rise of major civilizations. A metal monolith shows up out of nowhere in the Utah desert, then vanishes just as mysteriously as it appeared. In Libya, glass formed by an ancient explosion was found in the desert, and inside it are minerals that only form during massive impacts from space. And deep in the Namib desert, thousands of perfect circles appear. No one knows what causes them. These are desert discoveries that seem like they're from another planet. In late 2020, a helicopter crew flying over the Utah desert spotted something strange sticking out of the ground, a tall, shiny metal slab. It was basically the monolith from 2001: A Space Odyssey. It didn't look like it had crashed there. Someone or possibly really knows. Across the Namib Desert are thousands of strange circles, each one ringed with short grass, but totally empty in the middle. And nothing grows inside them. Even if you water and fertilize the soil, it just stays dead. These things stretch for nearly 1,800 kilometers, and no one really knows what causes them. Some scientists think termites are creating them from underground. Others think they might be caused by toxic plants, gas leaks, or just animals rolling around in the sand. That last one doesn't really explain nothing being able to grow in the circles. The other weird part is how uniform they are. The circles don't overlap, and some researchers believe there has to be some kind of system or pattern behind where they appear. They can be as small as 6.5 feet or 2 meters across, or as wide as 65 feet or 20 meters. And they last for decades, sometimes 70 years, before they suddenly vanish and new ones form somewhere else. The biggest cluster is in Namibia, but similar patterns have started showing up as far south as Cape Province in South Africa. Locals have come up with legends to explain them, calling them footprints of the gods. Whatever's going on, it's happening on a huge scale and across very harsh, dry terrain. Fairy circles don't leave behind much evidence when they fade away, so tracking how or why they form is tough. Right now, they're still one of the strangest natural mysteries in any desert on the planet. Scattered across a stretch of desert between Libya and Egypt is a weird natural glass that looks like pale yellow gemstones. Some pieces are small and sharp, others are big and smooth. It's called Libyan desert glass. It's made almost entirely of silica. Scientists say it formed around 29 million years ago, but no one fully agrees on how. The leading theory is that a giant space rock either hit the ground or exploded just above it, unleashing so much heat that it melted the sand into glass. That kind of blast would have been way more powerful than any nuclear bomb, and you could see the results baked into the landscape. Some fragments also contain redite, a mineral that only forms under insane pressure, like what happens during a meteor impact. So that detail basically rules out the idea that it was caused by anything other than a direct hit. Archaeologists have found ancient tools made from the glass, and there's even a piece carved into a scarab in King Tut's tomb. But seeing it sitting in the desert sand, it really does look like some kind of alien planet. In 2011, archaeologists digging in the desert in northern Kenya found something that didn't match the timeline. And what do I mean by that? Well, they found all these stone tools, sharp chipped rocks that were clearly shaped by hand, but the tools were over 3 million years old. That's way older than the early pulled this off, but so far, no clear answers. So Richard Ken Rowe disappeared back in 2016. But his case made headlines again in 2025 when a $500,000 reward was announced for any information that could finally solve the mystery. Richard Rowe, a 40-year-old father from Darwin, Australia, disappeared on November 2nd, 2016 after his car broke down near a lake about an hour south of the city. He was last seen trying to flag down motorists for fuel. No trace of him has been found. In 2024, it was revealed that Rowe had been caught up in Darwin's criminal underworld following a personal tragedy in 2011. He was reportedly acting as a debt collector for illicit substance dealers, and he owed significant amounts of money. Right now, authorities are going on two main theories: one, that Rowe died accidentally after getting disoriented in the bush, or two, that, of course, his death has something to do with his criminal activity. As of this recording, though, there's still no conclusive evidence either way. Jacob Jensen, a 41-year-old man from Denmark, has been missing in Thailand since March. He was last seen on March 21st, reportedly in a psychotic state while traveling by bus from Ranong to Bangkok. Jacob had arrived in Thailand in early February and was staying with a friend in Ranong. On March 1st, his friend went with him to Bangkok's main airport, intending for him to return home, but Jacob never boarded the plane. The next day, he sent an email to his mom. There was nothing unusual in the message, but that email is the last they've heard from him. His phone's been off since March 3rd. Somewhere along the line, he ended up back in Ranong and checked into a place called the Palmy House. After causing damage to the property on March 21st, tourist police assisted him onto a bus to Bangkok. He mentioned visiting a friend there, but his family has no idea who this supposed friend could be. Jacob's family reported him missing to Danish authorities in early May. On May 6th, an international missing persons report was issued. The Danish police have requested access to his bank records, which are now under review. In early May of 2024, human remains were discovered near a shoreline just north of Dublin, Ireland. First, a left tibia and fibula was found, then another bone turned up the next day. Forensics confirmed they belonged to a male, likely between 23 and 40 years old, standing between 5'8 and 5'10. The estimated time of death sometime in 2022 or 2023, meaning the bones may have been in the water for over a year before they were found. DNA tests didn't match anyone in Ireland's national database of missing persons. No hits, no identity, no cause of death confirmed. The remains have now been added to the Department of Justice's public list of unidentified bodies. So, even though this case is from last year, it just recently got attention again after a podcast prompted fresh searches across the city. So far though, nothing's come of that either. Back in April, 28-year-old Tiffany Slayton from Georgia went on a solo camping trip to California's Sierra Nevada mountains. She was last seen on April 24th at a general store. Her family reported her missing 5 days later after losing contact. Search crews combed through hundreds of miles of wilderness, even bringing in helicopters and dogs, but the water made things tough. A blizzard had dumped fresh snow, covering most of the trails. There was no sign of her for nearly 3 weeks. And then on May 14th, the owner of a remote resort near Lake Edison, Christopher Gutierrez, was checking on one of his cabins when Tiffany came out. She pops out, didn't say a word, just ran up, and all she wanted was a hug. He said the cabin had actually been left unlocked for emergency situations, and good thing it was, because it ended up saving her life. Tiffany had managed to survive in freezing conditions by just staying put and eating wild leeks. She was weak and dehydrated, but she was alive. When she got cell service back, first words to her dad were, "I'm alive and I'm sorry."
But it wasn't until cutting-edge laser technology known as LiDAR, or light detection and ranging, became available that they were able to study the ruins in detail from above and discovered that what they thought was only a scattering of ancient stone huts was actually a veritable city.
Archaeologists discover a lost city using laser technology, new species of ancient humans found deep in a cave system, mythical creatures, giant millipedes. These are terrifying anomalies discovered in South Africa. Science warned you about. If you're at all interested in the evolution of humankind, the cradle of humankind, just outside of Johannesburg, is a must-see. The site is home to the largest known concentration of human ancestral remains in the entire world. One of the coolest areas are the caves, where tons of proto and early human fossils have been found. There are lots of cave systems, but the Rising Star cave system may be the most famous. It's where 15 skeletons of previously unknown hominin species, Homo naledi, were discovered. There's also the Sterkfontein cave system, which has given us more than a third of the world's early hominid fossils. Inkanyamba is a legendary creature from South Africa described as a massive serpent with a horse-like head. This cryptid is said to measure over 20 feet long. It's believed to inhabit lakes and waterfalls, leading some to think it might actually be a giant eel rather than a snake. But the Inkanyamba is said to have supernatural powers and has control over powerful storms. For example, in 1998, a violent storm leveled thousands of homes, and some attributed it to this creature. Local lore says that Inkanyamba disappears during summer, transforming into a giant tornado to search for a mate. This seasonal absence has led locals to speculate that the creature is migratory, with sightings having been reported across different bodies of water. The creature got a lot of attention though in 1996 when a local newspaper offered a reward for photographic proof, and a couple of photos were sent in, one of which you're looking at right now. This photo was taken by a restaurant owner named Bob Teeny in 1995, who sent it to the paper a year later. Next up, we have Shongololo. Now, while that does sound like some sort of mythological creature or cryptid, these things are very much real, unfortunately. It's also called the giant African millipede. Just look at all those legs, all 256 of them. I thought the centipedes in my basement were bad enough. This is just a whole different level. These millipedes can grow up to a foot long and are covered in shiny segmented bodies that can come in various colors from dark brown to bright orange. As creepy as they look though, they are pretty harmless to humans, because you could just throw them on your face, apparently. Anyway, these things are mostly nocturnal and love to hide during the day under rocks, leaves, or logs, and at night they come out and feed on decaying plants. One interesting thing about the shongololo is its defense mechanism. When threatened, it can curl up into a tiny ball, a lot like a pill bug. Some species even give off a foul-smelling substance to deter predators. Let's talk more about the discovery of Homo naledi that I mentioned earlier, because discovering an entirely new species of early human would have just been incredible. So on September 13th, 2013, cavers Rick Hunter and Stephen Tucker were exploring the Rising Star cave system, where they found hominin fossils at the bottom of a chamber known as the Dinaledi Chamber. They then returned on September 24th to document the fossils and showed their photos to renowned paleoanthropologists Pedro Boshoff and Lee Berger. Berger quickly organized an excavation team that included Hunter and Tucker, dubbed the Underground Astronauts. The chamber itself was tough to access. It was far from the main entrance, very small, and it was a deep, steep drop. You had to actually get 6 kind of small women cavers to go into that space. They're the only ones who would be able to fit in there. In total, over 1,550 bone fragments belonging to at least 15 individuals were recovered, including 9 juveniles and 6 adults. The fossils included parts of the skull, jaw, ribs, limbs, and even inner ear bones. And this collection was the most extensive set of hominin fossils ever found in Africa at that time. In 2015, Berger and his team named the species Homo naledi, with naledi meaning star in the Sotho language, a nod to the cave's name. The most notable specimen, known as DH1, included a partial skull and jawbone. Later in 2017, more fossils from 3 more individuals were discovered in another part of the cave called the Lesedi Chamber. South African folklore has a creature quite similar to a goblin. It's called a tokoloshi, or tonkolosh, or tikoloshi. There are tons of different spellings and pronunciations, but they're mischievous and sometimes evil spirits, able to make themselves invisible by drinking water or swallowing a stone. While it can be used in a light-hearted way to scare people, its more sinister powers include causing illness or even death to those targeted by it. In traditional beliefs, the tokoloshi is often summoned by people with malicious intent who want to cause trouble for others. One of the ways to protect against the creature is to raise your bed off the ground. It's said that sleeping on a raised surface keeps one safe from the tokoloshi's grasp. Spiritual figures like pastors and traditional healers are also called upon to banish the creature and provide protection. The origins of this creature can be traced actually back to Bantu folklore, created to explain why some people were mysteriously dying in their homes at night. See, traditionally, people slept on the floor using grass mats around a wood fire for warmth, and unbeknownst to them, this setup could deplete oxygen and produce carbon monoxide, which is heavier than air and settles low. So people sleeping on the ground were vulnerable. Those who slept higher up, like on raised beds, often survived, leading to the belief that the tokoloshi would strike people who were sleeping low down. Some tales describe the tokoloshi as this short, hairy creature that can bite off the toes of unsuspecting sleepers. In 2025, the conversation around climate change shifted from just worrying about, heat waves to realizing we might have unlocked something much worse. This year's global climate update in September showed that temperatures are still climbing. We're almost past the 1.5 degrees Celsius limit that world leaders promised to stay under in the Paris Agreement. That's the international deal made back in 2015, where nearly every country agreed to try to slow down global warming. But a report showed things aren't going great in that regard. Carbon pollution is still going up too. Sea levels are rising faster than ever, and places like Asia are heating nearly twice as fast as the global average. But then there's what's coming out of the melting ground. That's really what we're talking about here. A United Nations report in July confirmed that thawing glaciers in permafrost are now releasing ancient microbes. Haven't seen sunlight for tens of thousands of years. Permafrost is basically frozen ground that's been sealed off since the Ice Age. It acts like a natural freezer, keeping old bacteria and viruses perfectly preserved, but more importantly, frozen and away from us. But with all the melting going on, all this stuff could be released. Researchers have already isolated some of these old viruses, sometimes called zombie viruses, because they've been able to bring them back to life, so to speak, in the lab. And they found genetic traces of stuff known to infect humans, like ancient smallpox-like and herpes-type strains. This immediately got groups like Greenpeace worried that these zombie viruses could unleash a pandemic. In 2025, scientists started realizing that the combo of artificial intelligence and synthetic biology, the same technology that was supposed to save the world, might actually be the thing that breaks it. The idea was that AI could help design new medicines, better fuels, maybe even clean up pollution, but it can also do the opposite. It can design weapons just as easily as it designs cures. Researchers started calling it the dual-use dilemma. Basically, AI has gotten so good at building and improving biological systems that it doesn't really know the difference between making a vaccine and making a virus. A Nature study from this year warned that AI programs can already design new proteins and genetic code faster than any human could. That used to take massive labs and teams of experts. Now, someone with a decent computer and the right software could, in theory, create something very deadly. It puts serious power into way too many hands. And then there's the other issue. No one's really able to keep up with how fast this is moving. Regulators are already behind. Some AI tools even create fake biological data, which makes it harder to tell if someone's doing legitimate research or hiding something. We've built tools so powerful we might not be able to stop what they can do. When geochemist Mengren Du piloted her submersible between Russia and Alaska earlier this year, she was supposed to be heading back up. She'd had about 30 minutes left of dive time, but then she decided to veer off course for one last look. And what a great decision that was, because what she found nearly 30,000 feet down in the pitch black Haddle Zone was what Du described as amazing creatures. Clams and tube worms living where no sunlight has ever reached. There was an entire ecosystem where life is not powered by sunlight at all, but by methane leaking from the seafloor. The creatures rely on bacteria living inside them, which turns gases like methane and hydrogen sulfide into energy. A study published on July 30th in Nature revealed that these microbes can even create their own organic food from carbon dioxide. Du's team also found that Haddle trenches might trap and recycle massive amounts of carbon. It's the deepest underwater ecosystem we've ever found that survives on chemicals instead of sunlight. In 2025, it became impossible to ignore just how fragile our digital world really is. Earlier in the year, a company called VeraSource, which helps businesses check credit and handle payments, got broken into. Hackers stole the names, addresses, birthdays, and social security numbers of about 4 million people. Then a few months later, TransUnion, a big credit reporting company, had a hack through a third-party app, putting another 4 million people at risk. A lot of the time, the problem isn't the big companies themselves, it's the smaller companies they rely on. For example, hackers got into Qantas, the airline, through a service they use called Salesforce, and ended up leaking data for 5.7 million customers. Discord and Workday had similar problems. Basically, every time a company lets another company handle some of their work, it opens up the door for hackers. Some hacks were even more serious too, like the Williams and Connolly law firm, which got the FBI involved, because foreign hackers might have been behind it. Private legal info, corporate secrets, national intelligence, it's all at risk. A Roman fortress buried in Egypt's Sinai Desert just popped up on satellite images. Beneath the pyramids of Giza, researchers say they've found massive underground shafts and chambers. And in North Macedonia, laser scans have revealed a lost city which may have been the birthplace of Alexander the Great's grandmother. These are mysterious ancient cities revealed by satellite images in 2025. So just earlier this month, the Egyptian Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities announced that archaeologists discovered what looks like a massive Roman fortress buried in the Sinai Desert. There were 2 others found decades ago, but now they've found evidence of a third. The spot's called Tel Abu Safeh, and they first noticed something was there thanks to satellite images showing weird shapes under the sand. When they started digging, they found the remains of stone buildings, living quarters for soldiers, and a 330-foot-long road that used to run right through the place. It's believed to date back to the time of Roman emperors Diocletian and Maximian, so late 3rd century. The road was lined with more than 500 trees at one point, which is kind of crazy to think of in the middle of the desert. They also found 4 huge ovens or kilns, which means this place wasn't just for defense, people were making stuff there too. The whole site is giving researchers a much better idea of how the Romans controlled the Sinai area. Earlier this year, a team of researchers from Italy and Scotland claimed that they found evidence of a huge underground city beneath the pyramids of Giza. They used radar scans and said they picked up 8 deep shafts going over 2,000 feet below the surface. These shafts seemed to connect to large cube-shaped structures and spiral tunnels, all hidden under the desert. The researchers think this might be part of an ancient complex, possibly tied to old Egyptian legends. They also think there could have been an underground waterway connected to the Nile, which might explain how materials were moved during the construction of the pyramids. But why hasn't this been all over the news? Well, there's been a lot of pushback. I'm gonna guess you were all expecting this part. This just sounded too good to be true, didn't it? Now look, there is a small chance that they've actually found something, but a lot of experts are saying the radar technology they used isn't capable of detecting things that deep without digging. There's just no way to confirm any of it. Egyptologist Zahi Hawass called the whole thing a hoax. So far, nothing has been excavated, and the claims are unverified, but even if part of it turns out to be true, it would completely change what we know about the pyramids and ancient Egypt in general. So, fingers crossed. In April of 2025, a joint team from California State Polytechnic University, Humboldt, and North Macedonia's Institute and Museum in Bitola found what they believe is the ancient city of Linkus, near the village of Kronobuki. They spotted it using LiDAR, or light detection and ranging, basically laser scanning from above that shows what's under the trees and soil. What they found was a pretty advanced settlement, the remains of a fortress, a textile workshop, and a bunch of tools, oil lamps, and other everyday stuff. The layout and the finds line up with the ancient Macedonian city of Linkus, which was part of the larger kingdom of Upper Macedonia. One reason this is a big deal is because Linkus is thought to be the birthplace of Eurydice I, the grandmother of Alexander the Great. So, scientists using LiDAR in the Amazon have come across what they're calling ancient garden cities. These large, planned communities built long before Europeans arrived. These places had wide roads, canals, ponds, gardens, and orchards. Some of the structures and layouts were so hidden by thick jungle, nobody realized they were there until now. Of course, the remains of ancient cities in the Amazon have been known about for a long time, but this team, led by Vinicius Peripato, just found 24 previously undiscovered structures and geoglyphs. These ancient Amazonians weren't just living off the land, they were reshaping it. They built raised causeways, fish farms, and planted useful trees in patterns, basically managing the rainforest like a giant sustainable garden. So this flips the old idea that the Amazon was just this massive unexplored wilderness with some cities sprinkled around here and there. Turns out it was home to people that knew exactly what they were doing when it came to engineering long before modern technology, and there are an estimated they gave a really high number of all the stuff that could still be hiding in the jungle, so this one is pretty cool. This past March, researchers at Khalifa University in Abu Dhabi used AI and radar imaging to uncover what looks like a 5,000-year-old civilization buried in the sands of the Sarak al-Hadid region, an archaeological site in Dubai. They trained an algorithm to read what's called synthetic aperture radar satellite images, basically radar that can see through sand, and it picked up patterns that seem to show some type of ancient settlement. The site is deep in in the empty quarter, which is one of the harshest deserts on Earth. But back in the Bronze Age, it seems people were living there in organized communities. The AI flagged things like circular formations, things that seemed to have been constructed in straight lines, and what looked like roadways, all signs that there were intentionally built things now buried deep under the sand. With this technology, they could find even more buried cities out there in the desert, hidden just under the surface. One of the researchers called it a turning point in archaeology, saying it allows us to, quote, see what human eyes can't. So far, they've only scratched the surface, but already the finds are pointing to a pretty advanced society living in the area thousands of years ago. So Greenland sharks are one of the largest shark species. They can grow to lengths of 24 feet, sometimes more. That's a big shark. You don't need me to tell you why that's scary. Now, here's something that I could not believe about these things. Greenland sharks have a very long lifespan. And when I say long, I mean like long. Again, I read this and was shocked. They live between 250 to 500 years. 500! That means there could be a Greenland shark swimming around up in the North Pole right now that's been alive since the 16th century, just a handful of years after the Middle Ages. Blows my mind. These sharks have a bit of a creepy look to them as well, with a thick, robust body, a rounded snout, dark gray or black in color. Their eyes also have this pale, almost zombie kind of look to them. These are apex predators, their diet consisting of fish, seals, and other marine animals, and they live deep under the water at depths of around 650 to 3,000 feet, and they've been recorded even deeper than that. Next on the list is radioactive fallout. So in the 50s and 60s, a lot of nuclear testing took place, and this released a lot of radioactive material into the atmosphere. These tests, which were conducted both above and below ground, led to the dispersal of radioactive particles over long distances, and the Arctic region, even though it was far away from the primary testing sites, ended up accumulating a lot of this fallout, which was transported there through precipitation patterns before finally settling in the ice and snow. The fallout included Cesium-137 and Strontium-90, which stay radioactive for long periods of time, and they contaminated soil, water, and wildlife. And just like with those pesky viruses, as Arctic ice melts, there are concerns about these radioactive particles getting re-released, redistributing the fallout, and affecting local populations and wildlife. Negatively, of course. You know what's creepy? Corpses. Dead stuff. It's just icky. Ever thought of that? Yeah, this is very enlightening information I'm sharing with you right now. Well, even creepier are old but very well preserved corpses. Mummies. Well, the Arctic ice is a perfect environment for keeping corpses nice and cool, and that's why mummies are found in this part of the world all the time. In one case, in Greenland, the Arctic environment preserved all these mummified bodies, which dated back between 1475 and 1635. These human remains were found in burial sites, and the cold, dry conditions of the Arctic led to the natural mummification process. There have also been several remains of the crew of the doomed Franklin expedition dug up over the years. They look pretty freaky. I mean, if zombies actually started rising up from their graves, they'd basically look like these mummies, depending when they died, anyway. Next, we have the discovery of crashed planes from World War II. There have been a number of World War II planes found buried under Arctic ice over the years. Take one case in 1992, for example. During World War II, a P-38 Lightning fighter aircraft and two B-17 Flying Fortress bombers were part of the Lost Squadron, which encountered a blizzard while supporting the Allied war effort in the British Isles. Because of severe weather conditions, the aircraft were forced to make an emergency landing on the glaciers of Greenland in 1942. All the crew members did survive the emergency landing, but they had to endure very harsh conditions on the ice for 9 whole days before finally being rescued. The aircrafts, though, were left behind on the glacier. Over the following decades, the shifting ice sheets of Greenland gradually buried the planes under about 250 to 300 feet of ice. But then in 1992, one of the P-38 Lightning fighters was successfully extracted from the ice. This aircraft became known as Glacier Girl, and remarkably, despite being encased in ice for like half a century, the P-38 was actually restored to flying condition. Next on the list are Arctic sea ice circles. NASA scientists, during the Operation Icebridge mission over the Beaufort Sea in the Arctic, observed 3 holes in the sea ice surrounded by irregular circular shapes. It's still not entirely known what causes these circles, but some possibilities are seals or whales creating the holes, allowing water to flow out and from the circular shapes, or warm water bubbling up from below. These strange holes appear in an area of young, thin ice that was recently open water, with wave-like ripples on its surface. Arctic sea ice is composed of both multi-year and seasonal ice and has been diminishing and thinning over the years, particularly, as you can imagine, in the summer. The Arctic seems to be warming at twice the global average rate. Some scientists are predicting that the Arctic could be almost ice-free in the summer by the 2040s. Finally though, we have the release of methane. We talked about ancient viruses thawing out of the permafrost earlier in the video, but that's not the only concerning thing concealed deep within the layers of Arctic ice. So the Arctic region has vast amounts of permafrost, permanently frozen soil, and permafrost is thawing, so I guess it's not permanently frozen then, which is exposing organic matter that's been frozen for thousands of years, like dead plants and animals, like the eerily well-preserved Yucca mammoth found in Siberia back in 2010, for example. And when permafrost thaws, the previously frozen organic matter becomes available to bacteria, which then break it down, releasing methane. Is also released from the seafloor in some Arctic areas through seeps. These seeps can be natural, but things like oil drilling can also release methane, and a lot of scientists are concerned about this because excessive amounts of methane ain't great for the environment.